Okay, so, hello everybody. Welcome to Channel Islands Live. I'm Ranger Dave, and I'm coming to you from the waters, the beautiful waters surrounding Anacapa Island today. These waters have been part of a marine reserve for over 30 years, protected waters. And today on this program, we hope to show all of our viewers just how wonderful this kelp forest is. We're joined today by students in British Columbia from Rutland Middle School, so let's hear a big shout out from all of you. Hello. Great audience. We have been fortunate enough to do programs for you in prior years, and we're glad to have you back again. We also have an audience here on the island, Madera School from Simi Valley. Hello, Madera School.
1, 2, 3.
And we're joined by people watching over the internet today on Facebook and also through our tech partners at the Church on the Office of Education and Explore.org. So thank you everybody who helped us to put on this program today. And we look forward to showing you some of the beauty of this underwater forest that we're in that is part of Channel Islands National Park. And can any of you, let's start with Rutland, just shout out, what kind of forest am I diving in today?
Dave, we're just having a few minor little audio problems. We can kind of hear you very faintly. Your audio just kind of dropped off. It's very faint now for some reason.
Okay, no way to turn your audio up. And Rutland, are you still with us?
It's still quite faint. Like we can hear you, but it's kind of barely audible. It just happened like 30 seconds ago.
Okay. I'm not sure what we can do about that. We'll try our best. Find a way to get out area if that'll help. Let's go to the island audience and let's have you guys shout out. What kind of kelp forest are we in? Just gave it away. What kind of forest are we diving in? Everybody shout it out. Kelp forest. That's right. And this is an underwater forest. It has a lot of the same dynamics as a forest on land, but it's well adapted to an underwater environment. Kelp is the primary structure of this forest. One of the adaptations kelp has is that since there's a lot of water flowing, moving back and forth down here at times in the surge, instead of having a rigid trunk like a tree on land, kelp has these flexible, pliable stipes, they're called, that allow it to move back and forth with the water. And so that's one adaptation that kelp has to the conditions down here. These leaf-like blades are also part of kelp, and they're much like a leaf on a land plant. But kelp is not a plant. It's actually an algae, a giant algae that can grow up to 2 feet a day during prime summer months when there's just the right conditions. Here's another adaptation kelp has. These bulb-like gas-filled bladders that help to buoy the kelp up to the surface. And my cameraman Josh is going to aim the camera up. And does anybody know what it is at the surface that the kelp is trying to get?
Say it loud.
Sunlight, that's right. And so kelp draws the energy of the sun down into the kelp forest, and through a process called photosynthesis, it converts sunlight into energy, to sugars and carbohydrates that become part of the kelp itself. And then there are things, animals down here, that will eat kelp and also use kelp as a place to live, a place to hide out from predators, and as a habitat. In fact, there are so many things down here, this piece of kelp that's drifting free. You can see, here's a better example, Josh. can you guys see these white things growing on the kelp blade? Those are actually called bryozoans. They're little colonial animals. These are actually animals living on the kelp. And so they make their home right on the fronds. They rely on kelp for their very survival. Now, do you guys think, Rutland, are you able to hear us now? Okay, so Rutland, you guys fixed your audio problem. You're able to hear okay?
Yeah.
Great, okay. So let me ask you guys, do you think kelp in this forest, as part of the food chain in the web of life, is a producer, a consumer, or a decomposer? Does someone have an answer? Producer, yeah. It produces food for things like bryozoans. Well, actually, bryozoans live on the kelp. It's a home for them. But a lot of fish eat kelp, so it's a producer of food. Now, we're going to drop down to the bottom and make our way over to a different habitat. Josh will work our way over here. And as we're making our way over there, Andrea, do any of the students here on the island have a question they'd like to ask us?
Yeah, give me just a second here.
Okay.
How many animals can live in the habitat?
I love that question. Sometimes I start off with that. So in this habitat, the kelp forest, there are over 1,000 different kinds of animals, plants, and algae. So it's a very diverse environment. And one of the things that happens in the kelp forest, and we're going to see today a little bit about it, is that there are things down here that people like to consume. And so this being a protected area, nobody can fish here. But there are other areas surrounding this marine reserve that are open to fishing. In fact, today there are boats right on the line, right on the border of the marine reserve fishing. And so that's one threat to the kelp forest, even though this spot is protected. But we're not only going to look at the kelp forest, see some of the inhabitants that make up the web of life here, but we're also going to examine what are some of the threats the kelp forest faces, and what are some of the things that you can do to help protect the kelp forest, and perhaps talk a little bit more about what the national park is doing and other researchers to help protect it as well. So while we're down here, I'm going to call in one of my support divers, Ranger Dan. We all look kind of alike with our gear on, so I had to look for a second. I have Dan and Meryl down here helping Josh and I. And Dan found two animals that rely on the kelp forest for survival. And let's go to our island audience. Well, why don't we have both audiences just shout out, what am I holding here? What animal is this? Yeah. And these two sea urchins tell one of many stories about the balance of life in the kelp forest. So are these animals that eat kelp, it actually, the sea urchin will have these sharp spines and they catch little bits of kelp that breaks off from the blade. The blades will break off from the main part of the structure. And then it will move that kelp around using its spines and tube feet to the bottom. Can you guys see the mouth of the kelp here, of the sea urchin here? Okay, and so this is a grazer, a consumer. It will eat kelp. And there are animals, of course, even though you might not think so because they're sharp, spiny objects, that eat sea urchins. So there are fish down here. There's one in particular called a sheephead that we might see today that is well adapted for biting right through these spines and eating these. But do you think people would eat something like this? Have any of you ever had sea urchin as a meal? Actually, I haven't either. But a lot of people do eat sea urchin. It's found in sushi bars, and it's called uni. So inside the shell is the part that people eat. And, of course, these red sea urchins are larger, and they're the ones that are commercially harvested in areas that are not protected like this. these little purple sea urchins are not commercially viable. They're not large enough. So if too many red urchins are removed from this habitat, guess what? The purple urchin comes in to fill the void. And then you have a lot of purple urchins. Their populations explode, and they will actually sometimes decimate entire kelp forests. So something as simple as whether there's the natural balance of red to purple sea urchins can make the difference between having a beautiful kelp forest like this and just a rocky barren. Now I'm going to give these urchins back to Diver Merrill because we care about showing you things and helping to educate you about the kelp forest, but we are also trying to protect it ourselves, and so we don't want to harm any of the animals. So Ranger Merrill will make sure he tucks those urchins away in a nice safe crack, and I do see that Ranger Dan has found another one of the animals that relies on this kelp forest habitat for survival. So everybody go ahead and shout out. What am I holding here? A lobster. Now, this lobster also helps tell the story about life in the kelp forest and balance of life. It's actually an interesting lobster. It's missing one of its two antennae, but it can survive. These are actually sensory organs. So this might have been a lobster that was attacked by a predator, but managed to get away and survive. Now, you don't see the claws on this lobster that you might be used to seeing, because lobsters here on the West Coast these are California spiny lobsters. They don't have claws like East Coast lobsters. Instead, they have these spines on their back that help to protect them. There's something else that helps to protect them as well. Notice how well this lobster blends in to the environment here. And so camouflage is a key thing to help protect these lobsters. Now this lobster's trying to have a little bit of kelp for lunch. This is a very special lobster because, let me just remove this kelp. It has something really interesting on it. Does anyone know what that is? Andrea, maybe on the island, does someone have a guess as to what that orange mass is on the lobster's tail?
Baby.
Babies. Yeah, oops. Oh, that lobster's gone. I lost the lobster. Those are eggs, actually. And so the lobster will hold those eggs in its tail. And the larger that lobster gets, the more eggs it will produce. And that's something that's another part of the story of marine reserves and the kelp forest. Because animals here aren't fished out, they can grow larger. Now, that was a relatively small lobster, but some of them down here are huge. And so they will produce more eggs and more offspring, and the reserves are areas that help to populate even the areas outside of the reserves. So that lobster's off, finding a nice crevice or crack to hide out in, and we'll continue on and see if we can find some other animals that call the kelp forest home. And while we're doing that, I've mentioned that animals like the sea urchins are eaten by people and they're fished, but you can't fish in the reserve here. And so overfishing or depleting too many of the resources here is one of the threats to the kelp forest. But does anyone know what another threat might be? And let's go to Rutland. Do you have any examples or ideas of what might be another threat to the kelp forest?
What's another threat to non-native species? Non-native species?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Non-native species?
Non-native species, yeah. So invasive species, there are algae that are brought in bilges of ships and things like that, things that spread here and will outcompete the native algae and will change the balance of life down here. There's one called sargassum that is a non-native form of algae that has come in from Asia that has been a big threat down here. And Andrea, does anyone on the island have an idea of another potential threat to the kelp forest?
Pollution?
Pollution, yeah. Pollution's a very common one. We're fortunate out here in that we are further offshore than the mainland beaches, and so there's less pollution here. But we're not immune to it. There's potentials for oil spills. There are plastics in all of the oceans of the world, and some are found here as well. And so these are things that can harm the kelp forest. Now, fortunately, there are little things that we can all do to help the kelp forest. Does anyone have any ideas as to how you can help to combat these threats to the underwater environment? Let's go back to Rutland.
We have a couple on the island if you want one.
Sure.
Not throw trash or plastic in the water.
Yeah, don't throw trash or plastic in the water. And not just in the water, but even on the streets at home, because anything you throw into the street will potentially wash through the gutters, into the storm drains, and out to the ocean. So just a simple thing like throwing your trash away properly can help protect the kelp forest. Also, something else we can do is to be mindful consumers, because if the climate changes to the point where the water's warm, partly due to activities that you and I do, that we all do, the kelp itself will disappear. Kelp thrives in cold, nutrient-rich waters, and if the water temperature changes here too much, we'll lose the kelp and the inhabitants that live in it. And I'm actually going to let my cameraman Josh make his way up to see if we can look at one of the more colorful inhabitants of the kelp forest that does rely on kelp for survival. So I'm going to let him swim ahead. And go ahead and everybody shout out when you see this resident here. We'll see if we can find him. There it is. There he is. Do you guys know what the name of this fish is? Garibaldi. And Garibaldi are the official state marine fish of California. So they're protected because of that. But they're also protected here in the marine reserve, of course. And this is a male Garibaldi. It will groom a nest of red algae. Andrea, are we able to see the Garibaldi's nest here?
It looks beautiful.
Okay. And it will entice a female in who will lay eggs on the nest. And then those young Garibaldi will hatch, and they'll help populate the kelp forest. Now, because this fish is so colorful, especially in its juvenile form, it was very popular with aquarium collectors. And so, by being protected, this fish has actually become a very common species found down here. It doesn't exist much further north than Anacapa Island because we're on the border of a colder water area, and this is the northern extent of its habitat. And this fish is another example of an animal that relies on protection through things like marine reserves in order to be able to survive. And I'll let Josh work his way back out slowly so he doesn't get tangled in the kelp. And we'll let that Garibaldi get back to tending his nest. And as we do so, there we go. We have seen today some of the animals that live here in the kelp forest call it home and rely on it for survival. And we've seen a few of the threats the kelp forest faces and just some simple things we can all do to help protect it. But of course, what we're trying to do is to protect it through enacting or creating marine reserves like this. And right now, about 20% of the coastline around the Channel Islands is protected through marine reserves and marine protected areas. And we actually do research. We have divers out right now who are studying the kelp forest, and they'll go to the same spot year after year and measure and count and catalog and
check on the health of these various species that are indicators to the health of the overall kelp forest. And this helps us to protect the kelp forest itself as well. And so I'd encourage all of you to do what you can, those simple things like throwing your trash away properly, but even by watching programs and participating in things like this, just gaining that knowledge and appreciation for what's down here also creates that desire to help protect it. And it's not just important for the fish, the lobster, the sea urchins, and the animals that live here, but for all of us. Because marine algae like kelp actually don't just provide a habitat for the fish who live here and the animals down here. They even produce a large portion of the oxygen for the planet itself. So I'd like all of you to take a deep breath. Mine stutters a little because my regulator's having a little issue. But when you take that breath in, some of that oxygen in the air you breathe has been produced right down here in the kelp forest. So I encourage all of you to do what you can to help protect these habitats, and not just for us now, but also for future generations as well. So I want to thank you guys for joining us today for Channel Islands Live. Thank you, Rutland. I'm glad your audio problems were fixed, and those of you watching on the internet, for those of you from Madera School here on the island, we'll see you on the surface in just a minute. Thank you, guys, and goodbye from Anacapa Island.
Thank you.